Welcome to the Diversity Connector podcast, where we explore the rich tapestry of human experiences. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and together as we dive into conversations that bridge cultures, challenge stereotypes, and celebrate the unique perspectives each of us brings to the table. Each episode is a journey through stories and insights from a kaleidoscope of voices, each sharing their colorful narrative. Whether you're at home, on the go, or just anywhere in between, you're now part of a community that values understanding, inclusivity, and the beauty of diversity. So plug in your headphones, get comfortable, and let's connect through the power of our shared stories. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the Diversity Connector podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Diversity Connector. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating guest. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Thank you. Thanks, Gertrude. What an introduction. My name is Blossom Anyimba-Cooley. I am very excited to be here. I am a diversity and inclusion consultant, as well as I do a lot of work within the disability and accessibility space. A little bit about myself. I migrated to Australia in 2007. My mom came here as a skilled migrant. So we, as most people would say, had somebody who did all the hard yards for us. So as a skilled migrant, it was pretty much, we didn't have to, I guess, struggle in the sense that most migrants would. But of course, being somebody who witnessed that journey with my mom and my siblings, I guess it's something that's not lost on me. All the struggles that migrants have in Australia, and all the work that I do in that regard, specifically at the moment, working with the Federation of Ethnic Communities, Council Communities, and fostering that dialogue about migrant women and refugee women as well, and the experiences that they have and how to improve their representation, but also inclusion in Australia. But my interest and my fight for justice and inclusion has always been part of me. I remember as a young person hearing lots of things, and I think as children, especially having grown up in a place like Nigeria, where Nigeria is quite really, really focused on religion. So we have a huge religious presence, and there is this struggle between what our religion is versus our culture, and understanding how those dynamics play out in day-to-day life. So Christianity was a huge part of my growing up years, and really just being a person who was curious about the world, but also really trying to understand how some of the historical things that's happened, not only in our lifetimes, but things that happened to other people as well. So in Nigeria, there was a civil war that occurred in the 1970s, and I was born in 1989, so definitely not part of my life. But it was also in a way, because I remember as a child burying an uncle who never came back after the war, and it was just the customary practices that had to be followed, even though this person never returned. So the burial was the same as if it was somebody who had passed away in normal circumstances. And there must have been a time frame where a person was declared lost until they had to be classified as dead. So it must have been a 30-year period or something. But part of my culture identified that if a person was gone for a period of time, then they could be classified as dead. So the burial was, there was an obituary done, and the morning of their death, again, this is somebody who died 30 years ago. Lots of people who, well, actually, we don't know if he died, but lots of people who may not have had any actual direct contact with this person, but it was a grief. It was a day of grief. People cried, and there were we mourned for this person for several days. And there was a day, the first day was the day of mourning, and the morning of the burial or the wake, you could hear screaming around, and it was just a way to recognize that somebody that was dear and important to us had passed away. So there were women wailing. And I was really curious, why is that important? Why do we still go through this, even though this person, we didn't actually know who this person was, for most of us anyway. And I think for me, that's the beauty of our culture, and also some of the things that I deeply miss about Nigeria and Nigerian culture is that we've had over 500 years of British influence. And as a result, it's beautiful when we have things that are very innate. The most beautiful part of our culture is the identification of our humanity. And it didn't matter that this person was gone for a significant period of time. What mattered was that that person was a person. They had people that had loved them, whether they were still alive or not. But also, most importantly, is that the acknowledgement that that person had come to this world, and unfortunately, due to a war that they had nothing to do with, they were gone. And I think that story solidifies, I think, not only my curiosity in trying to understand who I was, but my role in the world, but also specifically understanding what my culture is and what part of my culture I identify with. I identify wholly as I'm an Igbo girl, and the Igbos, there are three prominent tribes in Nigeria. There is the Hausa, there is the Yoruba, and there is the Igbo. And we make up over 200 million people, in addition to several other tribes and cultures in Nigeria that we never really get to hear or speak as much of as we do these three prominent tribes. But being an Igbo woman and growing up in Nigeria until I left when I was 16 years old, or just before 17, I think that having that perspective of, again, being a child and just really absorbing and learning, and also merging identities, either being as a migrant to Australia, but also even just being a child and growing with and learning about my culture. I think another thing that I wanted to say is I watched an interview yesterday where somebody was talking about the lack of knowledge about our culture and who we are in Africa. And I want to talk about that because that's really, really important, because I briefly mentioned that before. My knowledge of the Nigerian Civil War that occurred in the 1970s, that came later on in life. So at the time that I was witnessing this burial of a relative that had passed away, I did not quite understand in what circumstances. I learned several years later while I was in Australia, in my thirst and hunger to know And to understand, I read all the books that I needed to read to understand what happened. But I was in a Nigerian school from nursery or kindergarten, depending on where you are, till my final years of high school. And I didn't learn anything about the Nigerian Civil War. Additionally, I think understanding the context of colonization on our culture, on our traditions, is also something that we should learn as people as well. So I think Africans as a whole, or I'll speak for Nigeria specifically, because Africa is not a monolith. Africa as a whole is kind of in this space where we're trying to figure out who we are. Are we our past? Are we our colonial masters? Who are we in the face of, in the contemporary society of who we of in our current, climate, of politics, of enlightenment, of climate change, and of justice? What kind of politics are we going to play? All of this really nuanced approach on identity and decolonization of African minds. That's been that's a part of me that I think it's important and we don't talk about as Africans, because colonization didn't just take away our people, it took away our minds, and in some context, possibly our future. And we need to fight a bit more for it. I don't think we're doing that yet. So I think for me, the idea of justice and equity is the fact that it's the opportunity for everyone to have opportunities where it may not have been possible for so many systemic reasons. And it's so important to me that people have the same or similar opportunities presented to them, because then life wouldn't be fair. And, you could say life isn't fair. And I would say, why not? And how can we make it fair? And how can we make it or provide everyone opportunities? Because that's what mostly we all need. The opportunities to grow, to do what we want, to live the type of life that we want to live, to make the opportunities that we want, and to make the most out of this life. And I think as a firstborn daughter, and having migrated to Australia and supporting my mum, who, when we migrated, we'd sadly lost our dad. So my mum was a single mum for a very long time, and being the first daughter, going through that stages of providing as support and helping out in every single way that I could, I was always I always cared about people. And when I went to uni and I studied journalism, it was about people. And it was to hear people's stories and give people the opportunity to tell their stories. And when I created a platform for migrants to tell their story through Interview, which was a community TV that we set up years ago, it was to tell the stories of migrants. And I've done that in so many ways, either through volunteering within my community or through the businesses that I work in or that I've set up over the years. And as I get older, I'm really, really just focused on the opportunities to tell our stories and to be authentic. I think that's important, to be yourself and not be afraid. And I think also just being able to surround yourself with a community that allows you to be able to do that. I have had to travel a lot in Australia over the years, and I've lived in a few states over the last 6 years. And I think the big thing for me every time I've moved to a new state has always been to find a community. The idea of community has never been lost to me. And I feel like there is, and you know, it doesn't have to be a community of people that you have the same cultural relationships with. You can have a community of people that you have similar interests with, or people that you think have similar knowledge or expertise or experience or worldviews. A community that supports you and supports your interests is absolutely paramount. Another thing that I was able to also do was to get mentoring. I think a mentor really helps to consolidate everything that you're really working through, and not only provide you with the opportunities to nurture really your ideas and your thoughts, and to run through all of those feelings. And sometimes it's like feelings of inadequacy, or feelings that you might not be enough, or that kind of imposter syndromes that we have. And I was very lucky to have Yemi Penn as my mentor. So thank you, Gertrude, again.
Oh, Blossom, you've said so many things that so resonates with everything I believe in, everything I know. It's funny, I've just been reading a book by a Kenyan author, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, called Decolonizing the Mind. And a lot of what you brought up is actually highlighted in this book as well. So your personal journey, could you share with us how your experiences as a Black immigrant has shaped your approach to DEIB and accessibility?
Yeah, I think just being othered in so many ways. So being Nigerian in Australia, or being Black in Australia, being a woman in Nigeria, being a child in a culture that silences children. All of these kind of things I've sort of identified, and seen the sort of injustices that can really arise when people use their power and privilege and really objectify other people, or subjectify other humans. And so that's why DEIB is important to me, because it's about removing those systemic problems and empowering people who are marginalized to speak up and fight for themselves, but also give people the opportunities to really just be themselves, to be who they want to be, and to choose a life that they want.
Mm-hmm. So as an empathetic diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and accessibility strategist, how do you incorporate empathy in your strategies for creating more inclusive environments?
Gertrude, I really think that DEI is common sense. It's common sense in the fact that it's really about looking at who the person is. Look at the person at the center of what it is that you're thinking. So yes. I remember having a conversation about with a person who couldn't identify with people who are transgender. Due to their own, and it wasn't religious, it was their own very strong views that people who were transgenders were just the absolute worst, that the conversations around schools are creating children that are creating transgender people. Right. So that was their perspective. They were saying that people who were transgender were only just following the norm, as opposed to who they thought that they were. And so the first thing that I did was I just said, let's park your thoughts in one corner and let's think about the person, one child or one person who has struggled with who they were, and they've decided to take their own life because they couldn't live in a world that couldn't understand them.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, and the statistics for people who self-harm, LGBTQI people, was about 20%. And that's really, really a concerning stats. And for me, if the only difference was for me to say, okay, I just want you to thrive. I want you to survive. I see you. And I don't want you to be part of that statistics. And it's higher for transgender people. And it's mind-blowing. But if I just say, I see you and I want you to thrive, and I do not want you to be part of that statistics. I want you to have better opportunities in life. And if the only thing that I need to do is to improve my thinking and my and really learn to understand or empathize, then I don't think that that's asking for too much from our community.
So what are some of the most significant challenges that you have encountered in ensuring accessibility and inclusion, and how do you address them?
I think there are several things. So I've worked in inclusion DEI where it's really just paper pushing, where it's like, these are strategies, these are the plans, here is the funding that we have. You have to work within the confines of this funding. So I think the first thing is organizations, especially when they start out DEI, or when the purpose of DEI is not quite clear, or they're just doing it to tick boxes, they don't really put in any funding towards DEI. For DEI to be successful, there is a lot of training that needs to be done regularly. Training is very important in DEI because it's about challenging the thoughts, the norms, the behaviors, and the way people see the world. Because we all see the world differently, but not all of us see the world with a people-centered lens. And so what DEI does is to challenge your worldview. And we all have those blind spots. We all have something that we think we all have thoughts around different things. And sometimes they may not be acceptable. I have extreme views. When you ask me about certain very extreme things, I have very extreme views. And it's not necessary to talk about them here, but we all have things that are very personal and ingrained in us. And they're very, very subjective to who we are. But I think for me, where you draw the line is where your subjective views is impacting on the ability for somebody else to have a decent life, a life that can be different to you, a life where they have no power, no autonomy, and opportunities. I think that is a fundamental problem where we have laws and values and systems that lock people out from having accessing the same opportunities as other people.
So true.
So that's one problem that I have with DEI. And then another problem that I have with DEI sometimes is that when we talk about inclusion, it's oftentimes from the perspective of white feminism inclusion. And to fight a patriarchal society in a Western country, white women led the way, and that's absolutely important. There were lots of Black women who led the way as well, and people of color. But then I think as the fight and the struggle for representation continued, I think people of color have been left behind in fighting alone for their own rights, because even though we talk about inclusion, it doesn't often include us anymore. And I found that within the organizations in government that I've worked in, when they talk about inclusion, it's oftentimes white women inclusion. And I think that we really need to think about the intersectionality of inclusion. And when you are in a panel and you're thinking about, oh, it's an inclusive panel and it's all white and it's female and it's white males, then we really, really need to rethink what our thinking, our thoughts around inclusion is. To me, inclusion is representing people that are diverse in thoughts, in views, in ideologies, and again, and also in thought. So we are neurodiverse, but also representing the diversity that we all have. So again, not just from an ableist perspective, but having people who have disabilities, people who are colored, as well as women. You know, we can't do it all alone. I think we do have to do it together. And I don't think that we are doing that at the moment, because I don't think that not everyone understands the struggle of other groups, and which is fair enough. But I think that's where we need to inform, educate, and then better ourselves.
How do your diverse cultural experiences influence your work in fostering understanding and championing diversity in professional settings?
I think I wrote a poem a few years ago called "Being Black in White Australia," and I grew up in Liverpool, and you'd have, you know, people calling you the N-word while you're walking on the streets, or I have lots of stories about guys who wanted to date me because I was Black, but not because I was a human being. I guess it was just a tick box. Black women have lots of stories like that, and it was just identifying, trying to really, you know, silence all the noises and, you know, look inwards. Who am I? You know, I'm not all the things that all your ideas of who I am or who I should be. I am me, and I'm me because I care about people, and me because I fight for injustices in so many ways, and that's who I have been, and that's how I've represented myself in every place that I've been.
So can you elaborate on some innovative solutions that you've implemented to ensure equal access and opportunities for people of all abilities?
Gertrude, it's really, really simple. And for me, it's really about people starting small. Like it's not mind-blowing. It's about starting small, starting where you are, and connecting with people and organizations doing the exact same thing as you. So you can find that through groups. There are so many organizations, so many councils that provide that support for businesses who are trying to improve diversity, accessibility, inclusion, and giving everyone the resources to be able to improve. Yes. But I've always said, and I've run a lot of quite a few accessibility assessments in my time, businesses, hotels, and I always and I've done that for large businesses to small businesses. And small businesses will say, "Oh, we don't have the money that the big businesses do." I often say, you don't need to have all the money that big businesses do. You just need to start small. It's one little thing that you can do, and you can choose one little thing a year. So it's really simple. It's about changing the mindset that including people is difficult and it's challenging, because it's not challenging. It's really as simple as picking one struggle, because there's so many, but what struggle, or what's the value of your organization, and what speaks more to that value, and focus and run with it, and surround yourself with like-minded businesses that do the same.
So, as a published children's book author, how do you integrate themes of diversity and inclusion in your writing, and what impact do you hope to achieve through your books?
So I wrote a poem called the Prawn from Maine. It was an anthology, so it was a collaboration with several writers in Western Sydney. the anthology was published by Westwards. And The Prawn from Maine was about a prawn who got lost and in a tunnel, and then finds herself in an entrapment with several other creatures or sea animals, and those animals had different representations from different sides of the world, and the whole goal was for them to, with their diversity, work together to figure out ways to get out. And they all brought something to the table that the other person didn't. And for me, celebrating diversity is about celebrating who we are, no matter who we are. And I have kids who are mixed, and I want them to be proud of who they are and celebrate their own uniqueness, as I do mine. And I expect that anybody else, no matter who they are, does the same too. And The Prawn from Maine is about celebrating diversity in who we are, because it's beautiful, and that's what makes us who we are.
What kind of collaborations or partnerships are you currently seeking? And how do you envisage these collaborations fostering your mission for a more inclusive future?
Yeah, I have a not-for-profit called Not on My Watch, and I founded it a few years ago with the purpose of providing diversity and inclusion training to organizations, but also at the same time giving people of color the platform to run their own diversity and inclusion courses, because I feel like there is a huge opportunity to be able to do that. The Australian Human Rights Commission is now running, empowering marginalized people to tell their own story, specifically through anti-racism training. That's fantastic. I feel like there is a whole, there are lots of people that can tell their own stories, and I think empowering people to be able to do that is paramount. So that's what I do, and Not on My Watch is everywhere. We talk to councils, and we provide training to councils and businesses. We can provide one-on-one training to people, or we can come and run a training anywhere in Australia. So that's one thing that I'm very, very passionate about, and I hope everyone can join on, because racism, discrimination, it's definitely not on our watch. We'll not let it fester and destroy people.
Fantastic. Blossom, thank you so much for coming online today and sharing your story, your wisdom, and your knowledge. It's just absolutely awesome to see diversity in action. I can see that you're implementing, you're bringing about change, and you will help create a better future for the generation to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. The Diversity Connector is bringing us voices from all four corners of the world, sharing our personal experiences, knowledge, and skills so that we can create a more equitable future. So tune in again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing person. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. And that's a wrap, everybody, on today's episode of the Diversity Connector podcast. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our vibrant and global conversation. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a tapestry of diverse perspectives. Remember, every story you've heard today is a thread in the larger fabric of our shared humanity. So, as you step back into your world, carry these stories with you and let them inspire you to embrace and celebrate the rich diversity around us. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these inspiring stories with more listeners. Do follow us on social media by looking for the Diversity Connector podcast for more updates. Until then, keep connecting, keep listening, and keep celebrating the beauty of diversity. This is the Diversity Connector podcast signing off. Stay curious, stay open,